Hello, my name is Kim from Kimberz Corner and welcome to my Corner of Happiness. In this tutorial, I'll be showing you how to accurately measure gauge as well as giving you some tips and tricks if your gauge is off. You will need a rigid ruler. You can use a gauge ruler just like this one, a school ruler that's 12 inches, a yardstick. You can use a flimsy tape measure, but these can get skewed and stretched, so using a rigid ruler really guarantees that you're measuring 4 inches accurately. One of the first things I'd like to point out about gauge is that all you're doing when you're taking a gauge swatch measurement is to see if your tension matches another crocheter's. Everyone crochets differently, and depending on how differently, it can be very hard to match their gauge. For instance, I made up this swatch with my Prim 6mm hook, or the J hook, and when I'm crocheting, if you've watched any of my videos, I use the whole neck of my hook. Whether that's a Furls hook, I'm using my whole neck, or if it's a Susan Bates hook, I'm using the whole neck. When I'm crocheting with Susan Bates, I actually come up on the handle a little bit. So I prefer a hook with a long neck or a standard size neck. One with a really short neck, I just don't really. I'm gonna use the whole thing. But someone else may not do that. Someone else may just keep their stitches really tight. I've seen videos of other crocheters who really just, who don't pull up on their stitches. Because what happens when I stick my whole hook in there and pull up, well, I'm also pulling up a height. So the height comes from how much you pull up on your stitches, and the width is how tightly you weave them together. So when I pull up and I do my final pull through, will depend on how big the stitches end up widthwise of each other. Another thing I'd like to point out with gauge is you should never measure your first and last row or your first and last stitches of the row because of the turning chains. Your turning chains can become really tight or really loose, as well as the first and last stitch of the row can become really tight or really loose because of you physically turning the work and pulling up on your yarn, readjusting your tension. That being said, the most accurate measure of your tension comes from the center of your sample or your work. So how to measure your gauge properly is you crochet a width and a height larger than 4 inches, no matter how many stitches it is. Just as long as your swatch is bigger than a 4x4 inch square, you'll be set to go. And that can be by 2 stitches and 2 rows. So if you're trying to measure 10 rows, crochet 12 rows. If you're trying to measure 10 stitches, crochet 12 stitches. And that can give you more accurate. I encourage you to crochet more, but I will show you later in the video of you can still get an accurate reading with just adding 2 stitches to your gauge swatch. When it comes down to physically measuring your gauge, it's really easy. All we're going to do is plop our ruler down, and I like to line up the indicators, so the 0 and 4 indicator with a stitch. I was taught that if the 4 inch mark or the 0 inch mark falls in the middle of a stitch, just like this, I hope you can see that really well, to count that stitch in your 4 inches. That's just what I was taught. Others may have a different recommendation, but that's what I always do. Okay, so just plop this down and line it up with some stitches, and we're going to count what's in between our 4 inches. So there's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, and 15. So I've got 15 stitches in 4 inches. And this, I don't know if you've noticed, but this was my front side of the stitch, and this was the back side. I encourage you to measure both sides. So front side, I got 15 inches. I'm going to come down more in the middle and get the back side. So I've lined up my 0 in between some stitches, and I'll count forward. So there's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, and 15. So we've got 15 stitches in 4 inches. Now for the rows, it's the same thing. We'll plop our ruler down and we'll count the rows. So I've matched up my 4-inch line with this row. So I'll go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, and 9. And I'll come over to the other side or in the middle somewhere and do it again. So this time I'll line up my 4 inches with my second row, and I'll count up. So I've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. Oops, that was 9. So my gauge for this swatch and my 6mm hook is 15 stitches by 9 rows equals 4 by 4 inches. Now let me show you on another example. Now this swatch was made with a weight 3 yarn, or a DK light weight, and a 5mm hook. So funny enough, our swatch is actually the same gauge as before, but let me show you. So we've got, let me line up my stitches. Got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15. We go to the back side. There's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15. So 15 stitches across is 4 inches. Now let's count the rows. We've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. Come on this side. Do this one. Okay. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, and 9. That one's a little bit over. Let me go. Let me try it this way, just because I got a little bit of indiscrepancy with my measurement. So I've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. And I do have a little bit of indiscrepancy there, but it's close enough, because if I go in the middle, this is where gauge is tricky, and I'm glad it's doing this so I can show you. So there's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 stitches. If you came on the end, no, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. It's like 9.5 rows. It's 4 inches. So that's a good proof that in the middle of your swatch is the most accurate reading. But let me show you with the same yarn and the same needle what happens if you just measure 15 stitches by 9 rows exactly. Now in this little swatch, my turning chain does count as a stitch. So there's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, and 15 stitches versus 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 rows. So when you just do a swatch, that is just the exact number of stitches. Let me show you what happens. You'll line up your 0, but if you'll notice that there's a 1/4 inch difference. And if we line up, let's do our 4 inches with the top, come down. So our height kind of matched, but let me flip it over. You can get, depending on where you measure, you can get a discrepancy there, but especially with your width. That's where I notice it more personally. The height typically always is the same for me. I still like to crochet 2 more rows, but it's really the width that I notice it. So this is truly 15 stitches, but our gauge is a 1/4 inch off than the 15 stitches on this piece that's larger than 4 inches. So that is why it is important to use the middle of a swatch that's bigger than what you're measuring. Now let me show you an example of a gauge that I have trouble meeting personally, and that is a half double crochet with a 6mm, and the gauge reads 13 stitches by 10 rows equals 4 inches. So I've done 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12 rows, and I think this was 16 stitches and this one was 18 stitches. But they're both 12 rows. I think this is 13 rows actually. But I've done more rows and more stitches than the gauge measurement reading. So let me show you my measurements for this swatch with the 6mm hook. So if I line up my stitch, I'll get 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, maybe 14. It's kind of in the middle, kind of not. Let's go down to the back side and get my reading this way. So I've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13. kind of the same thing. 13, kind of 14, but really 13. So I've matched that. I've matched the 13 stitches. Let's go for the row count now. Okay, and I can already tell my 4 is kind of in the middle. So I'll go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, and 10. Okay, so really it's 9 rows. I'm gonna count 9 rows because that's really not in the middle. It's kind of hugging that 9th row. But let me count it. Let me count this way. More in the middle so I can get an accurate reading. There's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, and 9. So yeah, so it's more 9 rows. So I met the stitch count, but I did not meet the row count. And if that was important to me, like if I'm doing a really short crop top pattern, you know, or if it's a really small placemat or a coaster or something that's a lot smaller and you want it to be that specific size height-wise, that's probably going to be an issue for you because over 20 rows, well, you actually have the size of 18 rows instead of 20 because your size is, you know, you're not meeting your gauge initially. So I switched my hook sizes and I did another one with the 5.5 millimeter, and let me count this one. So let me come and count these. I've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14. Okay, so looks like I've added a stitch just by going down a hook size. Let me count again. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, and 14. Okay, so I did add a stitch by going down one hook size, but let's measure the row count. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, and 10. Okay, let me do it one more spot. Flip it up this time. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, and 10. Okay, so with just changing my hook size, I met the row requirement for 10 inches, but I added a stitch. So instead of 13, it's 14. So here is where it's really up to you on where to go from here. After you've changed the hook size and seen what both sides, you know, what both sizes give you, you can try changing the yarn. I know this particular yarn is a cotton worsted weight that I got from Walmart that I just had in my stash, but the I Love This yarn from Hobby Lobby is a lot thicker and it's more on the heavier side of a worsted weight. So you could try that with your 6 millimeter to see if you can get 10 rows to equal 4 inches with your 13 stitches. It's really just a matter of playing with it at this point and what's important to you. So like I kind of got into earlier, if the height is what you need or the width is what you need, that's the hook you should go with. So if the height does not matter and it's a long, flowy, lacy cardigan, I would probably just stick with this because I got the width correct. But if the height matters and you're only off by a stitch like I was, it's up to your discretion to use the smaller hook size like I got for, like I said, a crop top. You know, if you need that height to be very specific and you need it to fit you a certain way, then I would probably go with the 5.5 millimeter. Because I personally like a little more wiggle room on the width of like a shirt versus the height. You know, I don't want it to be too long, I don't want it to be too short. So that's where it's all up to you to decide which way you're gonna go and see how your final project turns out. Thank you so much for watching. I hope you learned something from this video. Please don't forget to like and subscribe and leave any questions you have for me in the comment section below. I'll see you next time.